Gen Alpha still can't read. Yeah, so Generation Alpha can't read, which is true. Honestly, I think the same applies to late Zoomers. Right, by Damon Cassidy. Um, right, I had my voluntary social year in a primary school, and well, that's the best place you can experience children learning to read and to write. And overall, I'd argue it has gotten worse. The writing has gotten worse. The reading has gotten worse. I see so many students who have horrible. They're just like really bad at reading. Um, multiple students in fourth grade who could not understand. Um, who could not understand. How do I say this? First grade texts you would read to like for first like at the end of like first grade, they could not comprehend these. I had multiple students from like first grade to fourth grade. I had students who could not read. I had my for like my studying, right, because I'm studying to be a teacher. I had my lit experience, right, in for like middle schoolers. Same issue, dozens of middle schoolers that can already not read, and those are Zoomers, right? What are late Zoomers again? Which again, I think everyone before 2000, like somewhere around 2011, 2012, is still a Zoomer. But those have already problems. It gets even better when we look at what's apparently Sweden is slowly removing tablets from classrooms again. Reason being, while they can read text, they have forgotten the ability to understand. They've lost the ability to understand them, which is why they're removing which is why they're removing tablets now. That's the problem that we are currently facing. Um I think this is due to more screen time. I do think that's the case. I also think that it has to do something with dropping attention spans. I can read. Yeah, but not everyone is the same, right? Just because you can do it doesn't mean everyone else can't. And I think it is due to more screen time. And it is also due to children being able to less focus because short attention spans. And you need to be able to have a long attention span to actually read and understand the text. But that's interesting. Why? Shouldn't the reason be so that they can spell better? Sadly, I don't know. The tablets have just made it so that they struggle to understand texts now, which is interesting. And headache, you can take some anti-headache. Yeah, but I don't want to throw in every time I get a headache, some pills in. That sucks cheeks, and I'm not interested in that. We don't do that. Anyways, we'll go in. We'll go in. Let's hear some numbers. Actually, let's hear some numbers.
According to the nation's report card, 40% of Gen Alpha do not have basic reading skills, the highest level in over
40%, by the way. This is fun. 40%. Kids rarely read whole books anymore, even in English class. So, funnily enough, I have to read a novel for college. That's gonna be fun. I haven't read a novel in a while, like a proper novel. I read other things, but I don't really read novels. So that's gonna be very interesting. Apparently, the novel I decided for is a fantasy novel. I wanted something like I wanted a real hero story, so I just picked that. Was interesting. I know you want to be a teacher. Yeah, I do want to be a teacher, even though studying isn't go the way I want to because of multiple complications. I'm afraid Gen Beta might not be. Well, this is going to be a trend that will also continue into Generation Beta, right?
decades, and as nearly half of all new teachers are already leaving the field, fourth grade reading scores are now falling back towards levels seen in the 1980s, raising the question, why is Gen Alpha facing a full-blown education crisis? Despite decades of technological
Because that entire thing needs to be a Google Docs the other thing in question. Not really. I just like to read other things. I just like to read like scientific stuff. I enjoy that a lot. Reading through, for example, scientific papers is very interesting, depending on certain topics, such as this, for example. For me, my constant screen time on my TV got me learning English. See, I learned English because I wanted to understand video games at the time that did not have a German translation. Otherwise, I wouldn't. See, if I hadn't played Legaia 2 on the PlayStation 2, I probably wouldn't be speaking English right now, and you all guys wouldn't even met me. So thank Legaia 2, which I do want to stream, by the way, eventually, because I never really got to finish it, because after did well enough to understand what was going on, I couldn't finish it because I was too incompetent as a child. Here's the thing, right? The entire system needs a restart. That's the harsh truth. We like that is like aside from like the fact that the way we are handling reading, right? We are we are preparing students for current jobs that won't exist anymore or not exist as much anymore when they graduate. I can tell you in 20 years, a lot of the jobs we have right now, they're just gone. Because robots will be doing this. They can 3D print houses. Yeah, crazy. They can 3D print houses. In fact, I have 3D printed houses standing right down there if you walk down the street. Interesting, isn't it? They can 3D print houses at this point. You're never preparing. You need to. So a question that really got me is when I was asked, or when somebody else asked the question, what are you teaching your students for the future? And the thing I've seen and the thing I've experienced during all the semesters is that nothing. Nothing. I can quite literally tell you, I'm preparing my students for nothing in the future. All the literature that I consume regarding my studies is old. It's material from the 70s, the 60s, the 80s, the 90s. I have not had a book yet that was written in the 2010s. I've not had a book that was written after 2010. The most newest book I've had is 2007. We're facing backwards, not forwards. And that's what's fucking over our children. Because we're living a time, or they live in a time, where they need to run in order to not be left behind. And we're not even giving them the tools to run. They need to do that on their own, which sucks ass. I learned English because, well, they taught it in media, I guess. Yeah, makes sense. Okay, I actually inspired one person to learn new languages because of the story I told about you with the game thing with English. That's cool. That's cool. That's awesome.
Advancement, you would expect Gen Alpha to be excelling in what should be the greatest time to live in human history. Yet, they're not only struggling to read, but 61% are considered below proficient in math, meaning there are now more 4th graders who know the viral 6-7 trend than can actually explain the difference between even and odd numbers, reflecting a system not shaped by accident, but by decades of decisions that prioritize short-term outcomes over the long-term development of the nation's youth. By the early 1970s, when the country began formally tracking educational progress, the system was beginning to improve, because for the first time, meaningful investment was actually being directed.
And let's not forget that we're running out of teachers, which is just the hard truth. We have a huge lack of teachers, and nobody really actually wants to do it. Learn English and Filipino language in the class. Yes, Philippines also have English teaching in most classes. Yeah, we have it as well. I got the lucky privilege that I got English taught in school already as early as 1st grade because I was in a different school, which focused on a different way of learning. Honestly helped me. Here's the thing: we're running out of teachers. A lot of the people that I started out with in my first semester are gone. They are gone. They are no longer studying this. They are gone. Isn't that crazy? I'm like a survivor at this point. Sixth semester survivor.
Towards emerging generations. Students were staying in school longer, reading and math scores were stable or rising, graduation rates were climbing, and millions of students who had been previously excluded were now receiving a formal education. Even per pupil spending was increasing as states invested in expanding schools, hiring staff, and building a more inclusive system. However, this early sign of progress was severely disrupted in the early 1980s as President Ronald Reagan entered office with a platform that included eliminating the Department of Education. In response, Secretary Terrell Bell helped assemble the National Commission on Excellence in Education, not to evaluate the system, but to justify the department's existence. The resulting 1983 report, A Nation at Risk, deliberately manufactured a narrative of crisis. Commission insiders, including staffer James Harvey, later admitted that the group began with a predetermined conclusion of widespread mediocrity and then cooked the books, highlighting declining averages and international comparisons.
There's also another problem. So we have a big issue, right? We have essentially, at least in Germany, essentially a no kids left behind policy. They will not let you fail. No matter what. It's like crazy, right? They will not let you fail. Under most circumstances, right? They will not try to make you fail. But there's a problem. You cannot drop this no kid left behind policy, because that's even more damaging. So we have like so we just picked like one thing that's less damaging, but it's more damaging for the future because they don't get the proper help they need, and it just makes it worse and worse and worse. At the same time, we cannot let them fail classes because that'll socially isolate them from their current peers, which is more damaging than the other. And we have not worked on the proper solution how to fix that. Horrible. In addition to that, right, specifically in Europe, we have a lot of immigrant students. We don't know what to do with those. Those poor fuckers are dropped into the same classes as the regular students. They cannot benefit from that because they need they need specific needs attended to them because they cannot understand what's even going on, because obviously the lessons are in German. They don't understand German, so they're essentially cooked, right? They're just sitting there not knowing what to do. At the same time, you need to focus on those students, and you cannot take care of the students that can actively participate in lessons. What do we do with those? Oh yeah, nothing. This obviously very much affects Gen Alpha as well, because a lot of millennial and Gen Z parents also who came here also do not know German. They will speak their own language at home. That's another problem. We have a problem here that nobody likes to address, is that we don't know how to handle our immigrant students, because for one, we don't get the resources, we don't have the teachers, and everything's just going to get worse and worse.
Comparisons, while ignoring the most obvious reality: more students were entering the system and taking those same tests. When the data was actually broken down across all categories, the nation's education system was improving. Yet the report's hyperbolic language, a rising tide of mediocrity, and the claim that mediocre education was equivalent to an act of war by a foreign power, dominated public discourse, drowning out the gains of the 1970s and justifying a shift towards standardization, testing, and measurable outcomes over actually teaching students how to learn, setting the foundation for the widespread crisis now defining Gen Alpha's education. As a result of the cookbook crisis narrative, influential figures began promoting and benefiting from a series of false solutions. Most notably, the system continued rapidly shifting away from phonics, where students learned to read by sounding out words, towards approaches like 3Qing, where students were encouraged to guess unfamiliar words based on sentence structure, surrounding context, or even pictures, rather than actually decoding them, allowing students to appear fluent while never developing the ability to break down and understand the words on the page. Lucy Calkins became one of the most influential figures behind popularizing this movement, and despite reading scores Drastically declining throughout the 1990s, her curriculum still reached roughly 16% of all K-2 teachers nationally, and even after the 2000 National Reading Panel strongly endorsed systematic phonics, these approaches remained in place, as Calkins continued promoting cueing strategies long after they were shown to be harmful to beginning and struggling readers, contributing to a widespread literacy crisis, most clearly seen in Gen Alpha. At the same time, policies like No Child Left Behind
There we have it. The US has it as well, but we have it in Europe too. Here's also a issue, right? There's like guessing the meaning by context. The problem is, right, that we get that taught as well, right? We get that taught here in English classes as well. I mean, like, not just like as a student, but like as a future teacher, you are taught that students are supposed to do this, right? Which is like, okay, fine. But the problem is that if you overuse that, they're gonna if you write the picture, right? They're not gonna always have a picture there. They're not always gonna have a picture there. And that's the problem. Isn't that nice? They should know their language as well, obviously. Now that shouldn't be the priority, obviously, but the language they need every day is. The problem is that the language that they need every day would be German. But nobody's helping them to learn German because they don't have specific classes to learn German. I think that before you can be thrown into your own school, right? Into like a regular normal class, you should understand the language. That is the problem. Because you're gonna drag everyone that does down with you. Now that isn't the problem of the fault of the student. That is the fault of the system. Sometimes it's the fault of the parents because a lot of parents just refuse to speak German with their kids. Of course. And a lot of parents also refuse to learn German. A lot of parents refuse to learn German. I mean, we have like these parent teacher conferences, right? You get the idea, like the normal, right? I think most schools have them. We have a majority of parents need their children to come to those parent teacher conferences because the parent does not know the language. Not even in a broken, like they don't know, they can't speak the language. So the child has to translate all, like everything. Even though they've been there since the kiddo was in like kindergarten or born here, they don't know the language. I don't know. I don't know how they do it. I don't know how you manage to live in a society, but you don't know the language. I don't know how you do that, and you manage to. Manage to get by, but like I don't know how. That's what I hate about America. We don't respect learning languages enough. Besides Spanish. So here you obviously learn English, right? As well, right? As like a secondary, and French. Though I'm gonna be honest, they should swap that for Spanish, in my opinion, because nobody actually uses that here, right? Nobody uses that. Nobody needs French here. As harsh as it sounds, nobody needs that here. Like most of the people that learn Spanish, French, right? They learn it for 5 years, and then after like they graduate, give them 3 more years, and they don't know anything about it because like French is a dick language as far as I've heard. Spanish is easier because it's more closely tied to from the sound, right? It's more closely tied to German and English, which is very interesting. French depends. Sometimes not. But that's all of the language we learn. If you study history, depending on what you study, it you may need to require and you may need it might be a requirement to learn Latin. Yes, you heard that right. To learn a dead language. Cool.
to reshape the incentives within the classroom. Rather than improving how students were taught, the system began tying school funding and performance directly to standardized test results, forcing teachers and administrators to prioritize whatever could be measured. Over time, this narrowed the curriculum, incentivized teaching to the test, and pulled attention away from foundational skills like decoding, comprehension, and long-term development. But more importantly, it changed how schools responded to failure. Because performance was measured through aggregate test scores, schools were often punished for low proficiency rates across entire student populations, creating a system where struggling students became a liability to overall performance. Retaining students meant those same low scores would be counted again the following year, while also increasing long-term dropout risk. So instead of holding students back and addressing foundational gaps, many schools began pushing them.
I mean, with more and more, particularly male students dropping out of school, this is only going to be worse. With more and more male students no longer going to college or university, that's only getting worse. Hi, Cricket. How you doing? Hope you're doing well. Well, yeah, Spanish is so much easier and useful than French. It is more useful because, like, where's French spoken? France, obviously, and then maybe 2 or 3 other places. When, like, Spanish is, like, everywhere. It is everywhere. Where I learned 4 fucking languages in school. I just remember 2. It isn't really useful. It isn't really useful unless they genuinely want to remember it. It's also like, here's a hot take that people will not like, but it's a hot take. If you don't like learning languages, you will never be proficient in it. You can see, for languages, it actually works. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And that the same with languages. You will have students that no matter how much you try them to teach them, for example, English, they will never be able, if they are not interested, if they don't want to, they will never be able to actually speak that language. As sad as it sounds. As a second language, of course. As like a first language, of course. But like as a second language, yeah.
Them forward, relying on somewhere programs, test-focused interventions, or simply reclassifying performance to protect overall metrics, leading to decades of compounded decay, where Gen Alpha is no longer progressing through a system built around learning, but instead moving through one that increasingly resembles a glorified daycare. As these policies took hold, both A Nation at Risk and No Child Left Behind effectively shifted the burden of failure onto teachers, allowing the system to treat them as replaceable cogs rather than skilled professionals. So while Gen Alpha is in desperate need of educational support, teachers now face a pay penalty approaching 27%, earning significantly less than similarly educated professionals, while real wages have actually declined over the past decade, despite record levels of overall educational spending, forcing over 70% of teachers to hold a second job.
But it is an adult daycare. It's nothing but in a lot of cases, it is nothing but an adult daycare. Listen. School is essentially just a place where you put your children because you have to work. If I could homeschool my child in the future, I would. But that's like very gonna be likely impossible. But like if I could, I would. Because it is just daycare. It's a glorified daycare. It's just a place you put your child because you have to go to work. And that's all there is to it. Bro, if the whole thing is graded, yeah, obviously it'd be more of a chore. You don't have a choice but to mug it up. Yeah. But you never get the results you actually need. That's why I'm like, I think it's bad to force a student to learn a third language. That is what I believe. It is. You can probably force through a second language, but I don't think that you can force through a third language. How would I know? I essentially forgot all I did in Spanish. Most people that had French know nothing in French anymore. Everyone that had Spanish knows nothing anymore.
With 31% working in roles like Uber or retail just to make ends meet, and with most of them working those jobs throughout the school year while managing classrooms of 23 to 26 students, 77% report their job as frequently stressful, and 52% say they would not advise a young person starting out today to become a teacher, a truly horrific sign for the nation's future. To see what this actually looks like inside Gen Alpha's education, I spoke with an elementary school interventionist with over 20 years of experience in the education system who explained the extra burden that teachers are now facing.
The social emotional is heavier now than it's ever been because structures and supports at home are not as strong as what they've been in the past. And then there's always the time requirement. You know, you're always expected to do something and have it all planned out, but there's so many meetings that must take place. There's no planning time. And so then there's that time burden that shifts to outside of.
Well, of course, like, listen, you need the time, but you don't have it. So you need to prepare, obviously, outside of your work time, right? Makes sense, right? It's logical, right? Makes sense. In addition to that, right, which is, by the way, not paid, which is horrendous. I think that should be paid. However, there's also additional issue. If you need a second job, you have even less time to plan out those lessons, meaning that you will perform mediocre lessons. It also gets more interesting if you consider the fact that, see, what we need to do is, first of all, to get more teachers, debloat the studying part, debloat it. There's stuff in my seminars. There's stuff in my lectures. There's stuff in my lessons. There's stuff in education as a studying thing that has no place there. It has no place there. Replace the stuff that is unnecessary with stuff that's actually right now useless. Nowhere has anything brought up the use of the internet. None of the literature that I've read has anything to do with the use of the internet. Nothing. Dude, we live in a time where, like, every information you need is immediately available at all times due to the internet. Why don't we more implement that? Why do we teach students over and over about really, really old history that they technically do not need? And I mean, more so, we don't talk about specific things enough, right? We don't talk about current events more often. I don't want to hear, at least in my country, 4 times about World War II. One time where you start a little bit, right? You go over just the basics, right? What happened, right? Right? The things. Okay. A second time, you go a bit more deeper. Okay. A third time where you just vomit out what you learned the first and the second time. Not useful. And the fourth time as well. I had World War II 4 times. I could have done something else in that time. 4 times. Crazy, I know. It gets even more interesting, right? Math becomes useless after 10th grade here. I'm going to say it the way it is. You will remember none of the stuff you learned in 11th, 12th, and 13th grade. I'm going to say it the way it is. I know nothing. I don't remember anything. I don't need anything of that I learned. I think you should be able to remove subjects in high school that you are absolutely convinced you do not need. I know there's a hot take, but it becomes really useless. There is ways to debloat the system. You don't want to do that, though. And I have a theory why. I forced myself to forget most of the Spanish I know because of what happened to me when I was 17. Yeah, you told that, yeah. But, like, there is ways to get rid of that, right? I don't see why, for example, right? You can't get rid of chemistry in high school here. But you can get rid of math. Which is like, why would you need that? Right? Why would you need the rest in math? Unless it's like tied to something else, you wouldn't need that. Right? If you go into like a technical school, right? Like electricity, whatever, right? I can see why you couldn't remove math. But in a regular high school, you should be able to just vote that off, kick it out. Same with like physics, because that can be removed. Chemistry, that can be removed. Biology, that can be removed. Of course, you need to meet a certain standard, right? Like, you can't just remove everything. But like certain subjects that aren't that important, goodbye.
work, and how do you make that happen, especially if you're a person that's working a second job, especially if you're a person that's running after kids? Like, where do you find those spaces? um, I think those things are really hard on teachers, just trying to keep up.
Now, you may be wondering, if this lack of respect for the nation's teachers and educational decay has been building for decades, why are we only just now seeing it show up with Gen Alpha? It's not like millions of American adults can't read. According to the Barbara Bush Foundation for Family Literacy, 54% of American adults.
Now that's diabolical. Now that is diabolical. 54%. Okay, 50% of US adults read below the 6th grade level. Today, more than half of American adults lack the literacy skills that many take for granted. Reading below the equivalent of a sixth grade level. Nearly 60 million Americans, 28% of adults aged 16 to 65, read below a 3rd grade level. Finding it difficult or impossible to fill out a job application, read a medical label, understand a news article, or read a book with their children. Young readers are struggling as well. 69% of our nation's 4th graders read below grade level. Diabolical, bro. These fuckers can't read.
Read below a 6th grade level, while nearly half cannot read a book written at an 8th grade level. In math, 34% of US adults scored at the lowest levels of numeracy, meaning they can barely do simple addition and subtraction of whole numbers, placing the United States near the bottom among developed countries. So when you combine a system that has been failing generation after generation, an environment where teachers are increasingly overworked and undervalued, and a generation that is the first in human history to have never known a world without smartphones, tablets, high-speed internet.
What if I tell you that the reason this is also is because the system is old as shit? Bro, this thing was made when factories were a thing, right? When you needed factory workers. That's why we are, like, put into neat lines, one after another. Raise your hand if you want to say something. Is exactly that. For example, our education system has not been changed since the Weimar Republic. Fun, isn't it? Old as shit.
Streaming services, and social media, what reason would Gen Alpha have to not be facing this crisis? Unlike previous generations who grew up watching their parents read the newspaper, visited libraries, or simply read a book because it was one of their only forms of entertainment, Gen Alpha is growing up in a fundamentally different world. By the age of 2, nearly 40% already have their own tablet, and by the time they reach elementary school, 46% already have their own smartphone. Among children between 8 and 10, 65% are spending at least 4 hours a day on social media, often interacting with adult content by the time they turn 11.
Diabolical. Yeah, it is. It is rather interesting. Adult content by 11. What does adult content mean? I'm assuming I know what it means, right? I first had that when I was like 16. It was an accident. I avoided it.
And while it's easy to point fingers at the greedy corporations, the failing education system, or simply label this just another lazy generation, the reality is that 2-year-olds are being handed tablets. And when 69% of parents say they are addicted to their phones, spending as much time scrolling as they do interacting with their own children, it becomes very difficult for a generation raised in that environment to develop the ability to focus or even self-regulate inside the classroom, especially when they lose access to their device.
In a school setting, it's not uncommon to have classrooms that have a really hot child, and that on a regular basis.
I'm gonna say it. Putting your child in front, putting a 2-year-old in front of a tablet is child abuse. I'm gonna say it the way that is child abuse. That is 100% and absolutely guaranteed child abuse. If you have also the time for your child because you have to work all the time, you force your child into school, that is child abuse. Under my rule, a lot of things would be considered child abuse. I can tell you that much. Anyways, I saw a video of a young girl who got into college while being illiterate. They don't care for actual education. They care about keeping a large number of students to keep funding. Well, no child left behind for adult students. Funnily enough, where I am, If you fuck up 3 times in the course, it's over, right? You'll get kicked out, right? And you cannot study that same course at that culture university again. You can, however, do it somewhere else if you want to, but you can't do it on that one again. Very interesting.
That room is having to be cleared so that that child can figure out how to regain their self-control. And so then teachers now having to remove, just say they're below 4th grade, they're now having to remove 21 of their children. 1 to 3 adults are needing to step up to help regulate a child. And so you start looking at the time demands and the lack of learning that's now happening with the other 21 children. I mean, it's not even funny because it happens every day. Some of them are related to children being asked just to work because they have so little attention that being asked to work is such a cognitive load.
And when you have a generation already entering school with weaker foundational skills and shorter attention spans, the sudden shift to remote learning during the pandemic resulted in the largest learning loss in modern history, skipping over some of the most critical years for developing reading, focus, and basic comprehension. And because the system continued pushing students forward, despite lacking those foundational skills, it also widened the gap between the students whose parents were more present during those years or had the resources to supplement their education, and those who did not. Of the 40% of students who do not meet basic reading requirements, roughly 65 to 70% come from low-income.
The idea that you can, by the way, the idea that you can get every student on an equal level is already, that is delusion. That is delusion, right? That is just straight up delusion. If you cover the margin, Muujin stuff, yes, I have. We watched the video. All I can say is Muujin Boo from Cockball Z. That is it's just hilarious. Regardless, it's delusion, right? You're never gonna get every student to do well. Reason being, even something as small as lack of sleep can cook a student. Even as something as small as no warm meals can impact a student's performance. A student's what a student eats can inflict their performance, right? The diet. You are never getting them on the same level ever at all. I see like a lot of teachers and the system itself being like, "Oh yeah, all students are the same. All students are equal." What happens if you, as a doctor, feed every patient the same medicine, regardless of their issues? You're gonna have a problem, and that's the same here. You cannot feed every student the same material and think that they're gonna perform the same. But that's what we're doing, and that's how we ended up here.
Households, with those students being 3 times more likely to be chronically absent from school. And as this gap continues to widen, collapsing academic performance may be the most commonly discussed metric, but this is also leading to serious forms of cognitive decline, increased dependence on digital devices, and even a resurgence in child labor.
Oh, it shows up everywhere. I mean, they're sometimes stealing because they don't have food at home. And, you know, I guess there was a part of me that used to think, oh my gosh, why is he stealing? But then when you start thinking, oh my gosh, he doesn't have food, he's stealing food because he's hungry. Lack of focus, concentration.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. Yeah, yeah. It's like, also like, see, when a student is aggressive and abusive, there's a good chance that the student is not to blame. It's of course not an excuse, but there's a good chance the student is not to blame. Because we had a student who regularly had violent outbreaks. But that was only because his mother was beating him. With the belt, by the way. How do you help such students? You can't. Because you would need him to get away from his mother, but that isn't happening.
When you start talking about just the amount of vocabulary they have in place. I mean, I said it earlier that a child that comes from poverty enters the school system a million words behind a middle class child.
And while each of these structural issues on their own is already creating severe consequences, the nation is now blindly subjecting an already fragile generation to the first large-scale test of how AI will reshape learning. To effectively highlight how concerned we should all be in this pursuit, here is a clip of Linda McMahon, the Secretary of Education and co-founder of the WWE, explaining the importance of integrating AI into schools.
How on... Huh? The American dream, huh? Everything's possible. How do you go from WWE to how do I say this? How do you get from WWE to being a politician in like education? How does that work? The fuck?
Schools.
I think it was a letter or a report that I heard this morning. I wish I could remember the source, but that there is a school system that's going to start making sure that first graders or even pre-Ks have A1 teaching, every year starting, that far down in the grades. And that's a wonderful thing. Kids are sponges. They just absorb everything. And so it wasn't all that long ago that we're going to have internet in our schools. Woo! Now, okay, let's see A1 and how can that be helpful?
So regardless of whether our students are being taught by the most technologically advanced tool in the
So a lot of schools here still don't have properly well-functioning internet. I love living in a first world country with third world internet. I love it.
history of mankind, or a bottle of steak sauce, what is clear is that we have very little concern over what will actually happen to Gen Alpha in the process. In a recent Pew Research survey of over 1,400 teenagers, many of whom fall into older Gen Alpha, 44% said that they already use AI for at least some of their schoolwork, while
Oh, I do it as well. I do it as well, and the teachers don't even notice if you do it the right way because like they don't give a shit. Regardless, anyways, here's an interesting thing. Well, technically, we don't need to educate them because there's already no jobs. I mean, most of those students, when they're done, right when they graduate, right into the unemployment line, right into there, immediately. Even here, immediately, right into the unemployment line.
10% said that they rely on it for most or all of it. Nearly half reported using AI for research. More than 40% use it to solve math problems, and over a third used it to edit their own writing. And while the survey didn't directly ask whether students were using AI to generate full assignments, nearly 60% of students said it is already being used to cheat either somewhat often or very often in their schools. And just like the 3 queuing approach, which has been clearly linked to the nation's literacy crisis, AI is now showing similar patterns in how it impacts cognitive ability. A recent study from MIT found that when participants used AI tools like ChatGPT to complete writing tasks, their brains showed significantly lower levels of engagement compared to those who worked through the material on their own. Participants relying on AI not only demonstrated weaker neural connectivity, but also showed lower memory retention, struggled to recall what they had just written, and reported less ownership over their work. Across multiple analyses, AI-assisted work became more uniform, less original, and far more dependent on pre-generated phrasing, reinforcing a system where a rush to completion replaces the desire for understanding. And even when participants stopped using AI, those who had relied on it continued to show weaker recall and reduced cognitive engagement, compared to those who had developed the material themselves. The study ultimately shows that while these tools may offer immediate productivity gains, their widespread use in educational tasks is directly tied to reduced critical thinking, weaker knowledge formation, and diminished independent problem solving.
What did you expect was going to happen when the goal is just to get to the next good grade? What did you expect? What did you expect was going to happen?
Ability. Essentially, AI becomes a technologically advanced magnifying glass for all of the problems the education system already presents. And while AI could undoubtedly be a powerful tool for students when presented with the right guardrails, as with everything we've discussed, there are fundamentally no signs that those guardrails are even a priority. So when we consider that Gen Alpha will be entering the job market within the next few years, this rapid pursuit of AI has the potential to
What job market? What job market?
fundamentally reduce human cognitive agency, critical thinking, and independent problem solving over time. And so what I hope that we're beginning to recognize is that fundamentally, this is an unbelievably complex issue. There is not one thing that we can point to and say, this is the issue. And it's not only that this has just happened recently, this is decades of decay. Yes, it's easy to say, wow, 40% of fourth graders can't read, and judge them when half of American adults can't read below or can't read above a sixth grade reading level. We're talking about serious issues. And as the K-shaped economy only gets worse, because it's going to, there is no incentive for it not to. We're talking about a serious education crisis. Like, this is a serious issue. It might be convenient, it might be funny to just kind of blame the iPad kids or joke about them and judge and all of these things. This is going to impact your future. The thing that we have to take away from this, when we look at the fact that teachers are now making less than they were a decade ago when adjusted for inflation, and all of the extra responsibilities and just challenges that they're having to face, the fact that there are hundreds of thousands, millions of first, second, third, fourth, fifth graders out there that are having to steal from their school, that are having to steal food from their school because they're hungry, that childhood poverty is increasing. It's increasing rapidly, and that there is a dramatic resurgence in child labor. The United States does not have a money issue, it has a values issue. We do not care about our future. That has been blatant. We have been so busy trying to figure out how to make this country great again. That was Ronald Reagan's campaign. It's been happening since the 1980s. We forgot to figure out where is it that we're going. And so with this, we don't cherish the individuals that are instilling the—
Yeah, that is very true. It's like not really different here, right? Again, a large part of our GDP does not go into education. It goes into banal, weird missions to, for example, for some odd reason, create bicycle ways in Peru, or shove money where it just doesn't belong, build things that we don't need. Project that we have a underground tunnel project, right? That's been working on for decades. This country build airports that will never be used. It is crazy. That took millions upon millions to make. We have literally an airport that will never be used, standing around forever. And that doesn't include, right? This, to be fair, my country's problem are a little different. We have a lot of bureaucracy, so everything you want to do just has to be like on legal papers, triple, double, like quadruple checked to make sure it's actually within the law. Is wonderful. It took ages, by the way, to get tablets into schools. It took ages to get internet access in schools. I experienced school with a large portion with no internet at all. It's very fun. It's very, very fun.
values into our youth. They're replaceable cogs in the machine, and that's horrible. It is a tragedy. And it's very obvious that we don't care about our emerging generations. Look at what millennials had to go through. Look at what Gen Z is currently going through. I'll even say Gen X. It continues to happen. I'll even go as far, and I've said it many times, the youngest baby boomers entered a horrible job market. It continuously happens, and nothing is being done to stop it from happening. The unfortunate issue is that—
And so will the alpha kids. Yeah. And alpha kids will also enter a horrible job market. So they're not gonna escape either. I'm not gonna lie. This kind of high school drama is always present in vtubers. Yeah, of course, it always is. It always is. It is always, right? It's vtubing. Come on. We had plenty of fun drama. Let's not forget the fact that we had people dropping docs on each other for using just like words, not even actually doing something.
we at least had the ability to not have the technological advancement compound as much as it is now. By the time Gen Alpha is my age at 26, the world will be unrecognizable. We're doing nothing to guide them. It is just such a tragedy. I'm not married, I don't have kids, and I don't have any biological little kids in my life, but I do spend a lot of time around family, friends, and I get to I'm privileged to do some babysitting with some people, some little kids that I absolutely love, and I look at them, and they are what instills hope in me the most. The work that I do and how much time I spend on this, and many of you know.
Same. I can still get to babysit occasionally my neighbors' kiddos, right? I do get something for it, so that's really nice. Food or even money. Obviously, I'm a voluntary social year where I hung around a lot of kids. I literally led a class for like half a year, right? I took care of like third graders for like half a year because the teacher was sick and they didn't have a replacement. So I was essentially just teaching them in almost all subjects. That was really fun, right? Um, it is very interesting, right? I'm starting to be a teacher and like people say like the world is horrible and they don't want to have children. And I'm of the belief is the world will get even more horrible if you don't have children, right? Because old minds will not solve the problems of tomorrow. It will be new minds. It will be fresh, new people with new views and new ways to solve problems. Climate change will not be fixed by the Zoomers or Alpha Kids. It will be fixed by multiple generations in the future, but you need to let these generations exist in the first place. It's crazy. Inventions are not made by old fucks in their 50s. It's gonna be made by new startups, by young people. That's why not having children is actually really bad.
That have been a part of the channel for a long time. The reason that I do this is because I care about our country, and I care about you, and I care about the people of our country. But I really want to have kids. And so I want to do the best that I can to be a good father. And when I look at these little kids, they're 4 and 3 years old, it just fills me with so much joy because I see the future. And I see the ability to be able to instill in them good values. But unfortunately, I also see the fact that they had a tablet when they were 2 years old. And that, I'm not.
Which they shouldn't have because it's interesting. They shouldn't have that. So in my mind I don't want children because I think the world is too cruel for them, I should still make them to make the world less cruel. It's F up. Counter question. When was it a good time to have children? See, the people that say they want children because the world is cruel, especially now, you're dumb. Was it a good time to have children after World War One? Was it a good time to have children after World War Two? Was it a good time to have children during or after the Black Plague? Was it a good time to have children during the financial in multiple financial crises? Was it a good time 2,000 years ago where half the time your child will just end up being dead? Fun fact, there is no good time to have children. Which is why I don't like the argument of like, oh, the world is so cruel, I don't want to have children. The world has always been cruel. Wow, surprise, I know. Compared to now. You know that up to the 1800s, half the time your child would just fucking die. You know that, right? Up until the 1800s, even further, child mortality was huge. You had child labor. Kids don't have to go to labor. Yeah, you may barely scrape by at some point with food, but you don't have to, as a child, you most of the time don't have to work because child labor is illegal. So I disagree with that. We still live in one of the most prosperous times in human history. It's just the illusion. It's just the feeling that everything has gotten worse. But overall mortality has also gone down. Murder has gone down, technically. Less people die overall already. It's just illusion. Because of media and internet and bad news all the time. You're just absorbing all the shit that the media nukes at you. Not gonna lie, yes, kind of tattered in the healthy relationship between adults and minors. If I heard someone is a babysitting their neighbor, the first thing I think is breads. That's crazy work. We have more children's rights nowadays compared to previous centuries. No, it's not just the feeling. Oh, it is definitely just the feeling. 100% absolutely guaranteed. Absolutely guaranteed. 100%. Up until very recent, it was literally coin flip if a child was going to die. That is no longer the case. Your child does not have to pull 8-hour, 12-hour shifts in some factory. Nope. Absolutely not.
Around enough. Again, I'm not biologically related, but I have heard that they are already at 4 and 3 years old telling the responsible adults to F off. So the oldest boy says that, and then the little girl.
And then everyone says it. Yeah, they, so, you know what's crazy? I've heard, 10 graders, 10-year-olds, right? Literally talking about stabbing each other. Calling each other dogs, and like, how they fucked the other one's mom. And I'm like, yeah, I'm putting my headphones back in, thank you. Like, we are cooked. Don't get me wrong, we are cooked, but we're not as cooked as we initially were. But if this continues, we are going back to just being as cooked. Not on a, how children are living, but like, societally.
Copies him. And, you know, there's been times where I went to go pick him up. The little girl is scrolling on TikTok at 3 years old. And so there's degrees of challenges to this, because we could say, why are the parents doing this? You could say, well, they're having to work.
Here's the thing, though, and I think we're not talking about that enough. Yeah, the education system is fucked. But get who's also fucked? The parents. The parents are also fucked. How in your right mind, if you are a mother or a father, you put your child at 2 or 3 years in front of a screen? You have to be out of your mind. Because I can guarantee you, that is not how you were raised. Why are you raising your child like that? I think this comes due to parents being a lot less strict than they now were. I'd probably be a decently strict parent. Now, I don't know if I'll ever be. Probably not, because it's impossible now, but like, I would be a decently strict parent, I imagine. Like that loving strictness. I don't know. We'll never get to do that experiment because I wait until marriage, and the women don't like that. Sag.
Having to do all of these other things. You know, I don't know if that's my part to be judging. Do I think that parents need to do more? I think always. And I think that that's always happened. Do I think that our education system needs to do more? Absolutely. I don't know why phones were allowed in the school. But I also understand some of the nuances behind all of these things. Again, what this requires is complex conversations. One of the things that I always do in my videos is that I call for community. I say that these issues are so big that one person is not going to be able to take down social media. It just won't happen. And in many ways, I actually think that that's good, because it shows that what we have to have is collaboration and community.
What this takes is years and years, maybe decades of work to undo the damage. It will take decades. That is the problem. But nobody wants to pull up with decades of work. Nobody wants to put up with decades of work.
But every time I mention that as the solution, all I get in the comment sections are, okay, but what's the actual solution? And so we are lying to ourselves if we think that there is a bigger solution than community. And what is happening with Gen Alpha and the education system is the perfect representation of that. It is going to take a village to be able to recoup and overcome the losses that we have right now. When I was born, my grandparents told my parents that they didn't want to be involved because they already raised kids. So I was raised without biological grandparents, predominantly. So what it took was a friend of my parents to become my grandpa, and his son to become my, you could say uncle, or I kind of think of him more of like an older brother. And that's really the family I have. My uncle stepped in and he has provided me with a tremendous amount of wisdom. My mom would work, she would drop me off at school, she would work all day, and then she would come.
I have the lucky thing that my mom was a housewife, right? I came home after school, dinner was ready, I could eat, right? My mom was a housewife. So my dad was working, right? And my mom was at home. So that was my luxury, right? Others don't, like most kids don't have that luxury anymore where parent is present, right? That's not really the case anymore. Are kids still using paper in school? Yeah, kids are still using paper in school, right? Especially like first, second, third, fourth grade, they're still using paper. Um, a lot of others still as well, but for others, there's still a lot more. There's now a lot more like usage of like the internet, tablets, and stuff. Sweden, they're removing them again, right? Um, I still use paper in college, right? Most of the stuff I write on paper, so that's fun.
She would pick me up and we would clean the school to be able to help make ends meet. And I watched the parents judge my mom for doing that. But that was a sacrifice she did for us. When my stepdad came into the picture, him and my mom didn't run off. My mom was cooking dinner and he was sitting at the table with Spider-Man flashcards, helping me learn multiplications. I'll never forget 6 times 8 is 48. That is what he reminded me of. And I can even remember the Spider-Man on the flashcards because we honed in on it so much. He cared about my future. I am a direct byproduct of the adults in my life. I didn't just willy-nilly come to this point. Yes, it took responsibility on my part and sacrifice and discipline and all of these things. But in many ways, that was instilled in me by these adults. And so what I'm saying is, if you're an older individual, don't be the grandparent that says, I've already done my job. Like, how could you think that way? And if you're a parent and you're doing your best, you're doing your best. But if you do think, man, maybe I'm leaving a little bit on the table, or maybe I am scrolling too much, or maybe I'm missing out on something, give a little bit more. There's always a little bit more that we can do. These kids deserve it. I just think it is just so sad to see this. It's mind-boggling. It truly is. I don't know. I don't think I have much more else to say. I think it just makes me really sad. If this has provided value to you, I would really appreciate it if you subscribe if you haven't already done so and like the video. I'm trying to do the best that I can. I really am trying to target the issues that I think that are impacting us. I want us to go in a forward direction. It feels like it's getting harder to do that, but I'm doing the best that I can. And I know that you guys are as well. I mean, we have a great community. We're often collaborating.
That's pretty much the end of the video. Well, he got a little more emotional towards the end. So, I think things that we can genuinely target everywhere is de-bloat the way into the profession of being a teacher. De-bloat it. More modern material, more modern literature, de-bloat it, remove everything that is not needed, that's not needed to teach any student, de-bloat the education system as well, remove which is not needed, prepare them actually, right? Actually prepare them for the jobs of tomorrow, not whatever we're doing now, and like everything that is old has to be covered, but students don't know what to do with their future because, well, nobody taught them. Those would be a start. Those would be a start, but it is really difficult because it will take decades to fix. And like I said, nobody wants to put up with it. Parents don't want to put up with it. Teachers can't put up with it because they're already overworked. The government doesn't want to put up with it. Anybody else doesn't want to put up with it. It's gonna take decades to fix this, and I don't think we'll actually do it. I don't think we'll actually fix it. That's all I gotta say. That's all I have to say.